no mascot today. Things are about to get real serious and real messed up. This is not a fictional story, and most of the horror in this story is happening outside of the game. This story contains real-world violence and abuse, and if you or anyone you know is dealing with similar problems, links have been provided in the description below. Now let me describe the situation. So this happened about half a year after I started to play D&D. For this game, I played with a friend Marcus and my girlfriend Leia, not their real names. Now usually we play D&D with other people at our school, but school was out and most of our group had other stuff to do. Well, none of us wanted to be the DM, and because we enjoyed playing with more people, we asked the owner of our local game store if there was anyone looking for D&D players. The store owner said that he could make a note and hang it up if we wanted to. We agreed. Days later, a guy named Michael called me and said that he and two of his friends were looking for players for a campaign that he was running and asked me if we would like to join them. I asked Leia and Marcus, and they both agreed. Over the next few days, he told me what kind of campaign he was running. It was nothing special, just your typical scenario. A bunch of heroes trying to fight an evil being. It didn't matter to us because we just wanted to play some D&D. A week later, we all met up for the first time at the game store. They were all older than us. At this time, we were around 19 to 21. They were around 23 to 25. There was Michael, who looked like your stereotypical nerd. His friend Jason, who was also a nerd. And Jason's girlfriend, Clara. They seemed nice, but I noticed that Clara was very shy. I'm talking very, very shy. She didn't speak very much, and even when she talked, it was very quietly. She also never looked at you when she was talking to you. Her boyfriend Jason often talked for her, and when he did that, or when he touched her, she seemed scared. By now, I think you can imagine where this story is going. But at the time, I thought that her behavior was just a bit odd. I didn't know better at the time. Well, we entered the store. There were some rooms in the back where customers could play games, like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or play D&D. Michael talked with the store owner and rented one of the rooms for the whole afternoon. We sat at the table and introduced our characters to each other. I was a warlock, Marcus a fighter, and Leia a rogue. Then Clara and Jason introduced us to their characters. Jason was also a fighter, and Clara was a bard. They also told us a bit about their backgrounds. I don't remember much of Jason's background, but his character was some kind of nobleman. Then Clara told us her character's backstory, and after I heard it, many red flags showed up before my very eyes. I knew something was weird, but I just didn't understand it in the beginning. But I had a feeling that something was wrong. Her character was the slave of Jason's fighter. I didn't understand why a player would choose such a background. It was so much different from the backgrounds we made and heard of from other players before. I mean, there were people who made a background where their characters were slaves in the past, but to play as a slave? That was certainly something new. So Clara told us that her character is the slave of Jason's fighter, but she didn't seem very happy about it. Jason and Michael, on the other hand, seemed to have a lot of fun with it. It was weird for us three, and Marcus asked Michael if something like that was really okay. Michael said that slavery is part of the world he created and that a character can be a slave if he wants to. I remember how he and Jason smiled about that whole slavery part and how disgusting it was. It was just not right. Then we began to play. Since we weren't beginners anymore, we didn't have much of a problem with role-playing. Michael was a good DM and played his NPCs well, and Jason played his character quite good too. It was just the problems surrounding Clara. She didn't say very much in the first session, and every time she wanted to speak, she had to ask her master. It was weird and creepy. After the first session on our way home, Leia asked me if I noticed Clara's weird behavior. I was glad that I wasn't the only one who thought that something strange was going on. Clara's fear was too real for role-playing. We both had terrible thoughts, and it was the first time the term abuse came up. But since we aren't experts with that, and because such a thing is a very bad accusation that we could get very wrong, we both agreed to observe the three better next time before we do something possibly stupid. We talked to Marcus about it, and he wanted to act now, but we convinced him to stand down. In the end, we would have a problem if we couldn't get any proof of our theory. We met again the next week. As always, Jason and Michael were in a happy mood, and Clara was shy like the day we first met her. My girlfriend Leia tried talking to her to get her out of her shell, but she wasn't very talkative. The whole time she looked to Jason and Michael with fear on her face. We started the second session, and it was weirder than before due to thoughts about Jason and Clara. We didn't try to be suspicious, but Marcus was a bit passive-aggressive. As we played, we all tried to interact with Clara more. We tried talking to her more often, but every time she had to ask Jason if she could answer. Sometimes he let her talk, but most of the time she was not allowed to. We had more fighting scenarios this time, and we noticed that her character acted very passive in fights too. Michael, the DM, didn't even ask her sometimes what action she wanted to do in the fight, and basically ignored her. Only when Jason gave her orders in his rounds was she allowed to do something. It was bizarre, but Michael told us that it's okay this way, because she is a slave. If I remember correctly, he even said that it's better that way. The three of us were shocked. Jason and Michael treated Clara like some kind of object. We didn't know that this session was about to get worse. Our party then went to a tavern after a difficult fight. We sit down at a table and share some stories with each other, but Clara's character wasn't allowed to sit with us. I asked Jason, why doesn't she sit with us? I already knew the answer, but I wanted to persuade him to let Clara's character interact with us more. He said something like, "She is a slave. She doesn't belong with us. Slaves are like pigs. Would you, a mighty warlock, eat together with a pig?" He and Michael then laughed, and Clara looked away. She was ashamed, and I felt bad for her. Then Jason's character said that he wanted to go to bed. He stood up from the table and said, "I'm taking her with me." Then he grabbed her arm in real life, very rough, to show us how he would take her to his room. Clara flinched and was obviously in pain. Jason then described to us in very heavy details what he and Clara's character would do in his room. He wanted to forcibly have his way with her. Then he told us literally how his character would do it. He would throw her on his bed and remove her clothes. Then he would force her legs open and have his way. He and Michael laughed as if it was the funniest thing that they had ever heard of in their lives. It was simply horrible to watch them. I asked Michael if he really was going to let that happen. I said that this is disgusting and shouldn't be a part of a D&D adventure. His answer? "It's a cruel fantasy world. These sort of things happen." We were furious. especially Leia. She began shouting at them, but Michael just said, "It isn't real. It's not like Jason is doing this to Clara in real life. It's just his character. But if you have something against it, then roll your dice." Luckily, Marcus managed to stop this whole thing with his character. At this point, the session ended, and we were all angry at Jason and Michael. We talked for a bit, and then Clara and Jason walked away. Leia and Marcus went after them, and they had an argument with Jason while the whole store witnessed it. Michael and I stayed in the room for a while. I also wanted to leave, but then Michael started talking to me. He asked me, "Is Leia always like that? Since the first day I met her, she's been acting hysterical and talks too much. Here's some tips for your relationship with her. You should be the boss. She has to follow your orders, and when she doesn't behave like you want, then you should punish her." I was angry, and I didn't want to deal with this anymore. But I asked him sarcastically, "What do you mean by punishment?" while I was putting my things away. This horrible human being told me, "You should hit her. Forcibly have your way with her. Take whatever you want from her because she belongs to you. Me and Jason do the same thing with Clara. You can clearly see how well it's working. She would do anything for us because we trained her so well." I was sick of him and Jason. Both of them abused poor Clara. I couldn't believe that something like that really happened. I didn't want it to be true, and I wanted to punch him, but I didn't want to make a scene, and violence isn't a solution, even when Michael deserved it. Marcus and Leia were waiting for me outside of the store. Clara was with them, and she was crying. Leia tried to calm her down, while Marcus told me what happened. Basically, he and Jason got into a fight. They were both arguing about his violent behavior towards Clara, to the point where Jason pushed Clara away and said, "If you're so worried about her, then you take care of her. I don't want her anymore." We took Clara to our apartment, where she stayed the next few days. She told us all about her relationship with Jason, and it sounded horrible. They met each other through D&D, and she said that he was nice at first. He taught her everything, and they played together a lot. But when they became a couple, everything changed. Jason got aggressive and violent to the point where he would punch her if they had an argument. She lost all of her friends because he forced her to never meet them again. Her parents live in another city far away, and she was not allowed to call or meet them. He always told them things like she had to work and she couldn't talk right now when they tried to speak to their daughter. She was even forced by him to quit her job so that she could stay home with this monster. She didn't have her own phone since Jason took it away from her and destroyed it. He watched her at all times. And then there was Michael, the DM, and Jason's best friend. In the end, they both began to abuse her mentally, physically, and inappropriately. This all went on for almost a year. This was the most terrible thing I had heard in my entire life, and I couldn't believe that I could meet people that were able to do such cruel things. And even in Dungeons and Dragons, a game Clara loved very much, the abuse didn't stop. Because of D&D, I have met many people. Most of them were good and cool, but a few were really awful. I believe that Jason and Michael were the most awful and terrible people I have ever met in my entire life. But who would have thought that thanks to D&D, we could save someone who was tortured every day by her boyfriend and his best friend. We helped her after that with Michael and Jason, and after some time, it was really tough for all of us. Police got involved, and lawyers too. There were court trials, but both of them were arrested and ended up with the punishment that they deserved. I hope we never have to see those two ever again. We are still friends with Clara to this day. She is no longer the shy and scared woman we first met, and has gained a lot of self-confidence over these last few years. While I'm glad that everything turned out fine in the end, there are still a lot of horrible people out there like Michael and Jason. Some comments are saying that we were heroes, but frankly, I don't think that we were being heroic. Most of the time, we didn't know what to do, and like Clara, we were afraid, and I think sometimes we were lucky. Should you know someone with problems like this, or maybe you have problems yourself regarding any type of abuse, then don't be quiet about it. There is help for everyone, and you don't have to be ashamed to ask for help. I know how tough and difficult it can be, but you are allowed to defend yourself. People like that don't have any power over you, even if they want you to believe that. Try to speak with a friend, your family, or someone you trust. You are not alone, and don't you ever forget that.